Hey guys, how you doing today? Hope this video finds you guys well. Hope you just got off work, kicked off your work boots, your scrubs, whatever you're doing out there. If you like videos like this, don't forget to like and subscribe, and especially leave a comment down below on any stories that are similar to the one I'm telling today, because I definitely love telling stories like this and just getting them out there. Anyways, without further ado, we got a story about one of the deadliest snipers of all time. He's actually the deadliest sniper of World War I. His name is Francis Pegahmagabow, and without further ado, let's get into this. So Francis Pegahmagabow was born on March 9th, 1891 in what is formerly known as the eastern shore of Georgian Bay in Ontario, Canada. He was Ojibwe First Nations, and he was part of the Perry Island Band. Pegahmagabow, his last name, actually means the wind that blows off. And I think it's actually pretty fitting because everything just blew off Francis's back like a cool breeze. Seriously, like the stuff this guy got into and he was pretty much came out unscathed is amazing. But unfortunately, that wasn't actually always the case for Francis Pegahmagabow. Actually had a really rough start to begin with. Both his parents would actually pass away before the age of 3 years old, and he would be raised by a man, sorry if I actually butcher the name of this, because I probably will, a man named Noah Nebamaniquad. And I'm just going to go by Noah because I don't want to butcher his name again and disrespect him like that. But he was actually the same man that raised Francis's own father. Francis's father was also orphaned at a young age. So it was like this weird curse that was going on at Francis's family. And Noah was a pretty cool guy. He was also Ojibwe First Nations, and he was also Roman Catholic as well. So he had a really strong belief system. He had a really strong moral compass that he would obviously instill in Francis. He would also teach Francis a ton of things like hunting and fishing and how to live off the land, which would obviously help Francis later on in his life as a soldier. Francis wouldn't have the best, but he actually had a pretty decent upbringing. He definitely made do with what he got and was a pretty resourceful guy even from the beginning. He would drop out of school at the young age of only 12 years old, but he would actually get straight to working. He would work in the local lumber mills and fisheries. And this would actually land him a pretty decent gig as a marine fisherman, which is sounds like a pretty crazy job to me. But unfortunately only lasts Francis till he was about the age of 25 years old, because England on August 4th, 1914 would declare war on the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And for Canada, they weren't really independent from England at this time, so that basically meant that they were going to be directly involved in this conflict from the very beginning. And Francis, he was actually one of the first Canadians to sign up and go fight in this conflict overseas. He would join the 23rd Regiment, the Northern Pioneers, and for Francis, this was a huge achievement at the time. Remember, in Canada, in 1914, First Nations people were treated basically as second-class citizens. They didn't have the right to vote. They were basically forced to live on reservations. So I know Francis was probably extremely happy and proud of his culture, and also to be a member of the Canadian Corps. Francis's company pretty much immediately took a liking to him. They nicknamed him Peggy, which is probably one of the least intimidating names I can think of, which is pretty funny because he's one of the most intimidating people you could think of. 1915, he'd be sent to Belgium, where he'd gain a reputation for being a really efficient runner, which is pretty much the guy who just delivers messages on and off supply lines or other companies, regiments, what have it. And at this time, in the beginning of World War I, this is an extremely important role because there's pretty much no other form of communication aside from a carrier pigeon, which you just attach a message to, whip up in the air, and hopefully that thing just makes it there. Later on in the war, they would come up with telegraphs, and they would even have phones in their trenches and run copper wire to have those. But in the early stages, they didn't really have anything like this. So the role of a runner was really, really important to have in your company. On April 22nd, the Germans would launch the first gas attack on the Allies in the Second Battle of Ypres, and this would hit Francis and his company. And this would also be the first major battle to be fought by Canada, and pretty much a trial by fire at this point. And basically there is extreme panic once this gas hit. The French and Algerian lines that were next to the Canadians pretty much immediately fled their positions, and the Canadians were either trapped in their position or on their own will just kind of decided to hold their ground. Taking heavy sniper fire, and obviously to get away from this we're jumping into slit trenches or just taking cover, but the heavy chlorine gas was actually filling in these spots because it's really thick and it actually sinks down to ground level, so this would force them out of their positions and then to be hit by enemy fire. It was pretty much just chaos all around. And at this time, there's no gas mask. This is the first gas attack ever to take place in history. So literally the only defense against it is, I read a story one time where apparently there was a captain during the battle, and he started yelling and rallying to troops to wet dirty socks and wrap them around their faces, and this was to act as some form of protection for them during the battle. Regardless of the situation, Francis, he also dug into his position. He started picking off any Germans closing in on it. Later on, he was actually delivering messages through a chlorine gas wasteland, basically. Then he would actually sneak up through no man's land during the nighttime and rack up kills that way. He would also spy on enemy positions, relay messages back to his officers. He was pretty much active as you could be during the entirety of this 3 days, while it was just complete chaos the entire time. There were 6,500 Canadian casualties. Francis's company alone would suffer a 50% casualty rate. As well, there was 4 other Canadians awarded the Victoria Cross during this battle, and Francis would have to endure the entirety of this 3 days. Francis was promoted to the rank of corporal after the battle, which was another huge achievement for him. Remember, like I was saying before, the treatment of First Nations by the Canadian government at the time was not good at all. So now he was actually in a position where people were looking up to him. He was giving people orders, and he was basically leading people into battle now, which I'm sure was, like I said, a huge achievement for him at the time. Francis, with his new promotion in the Northern Pioneers, were tasked with taking Mount Sorel, and pretty much this was a battle where they were attacking the city of Ypres now, which was the same city where the gas was flowing down from. So it probably wasn't a pretty sight going into it, but Francis actually led a charge and was attributed to capturing a large number of POWs during this battle. Mount Sorel was actually one of the largest engagements where Canadians captured a large number of POWs. They captured about 500 of them, and it's pretty crazy to think, because if you know a lot about Canada during World War I, they weren't really known for capturing prisoners, let's just say that. And Francis was actually accounted for over 300 prisoners captured by Canada, and by the end of the war they only had like 3,800 because, like I said, they weren't really keen on taking prisoners at that time. But yeah, Francis, he also then went on to fight in another major offensive called the Battle of the Somme, which is actually the deadliest battle of World War I. But by this point, Francis was starting to gain a really deadly reputation. He was pretty much just a ghost in the trenches, is what they referred to snipers at the time, and he really fit that name. He would actually sneak into enemy quarters and he would cut off like insignia and rankings of higher officers and stuff like that. He could just move through the trenches undetected. Basically, he didn't really even need to kill people. He probably only did it to get his company further. He seemed like a pretty lenient guy, considering, like I said, he was accounted for taking as many prisoners as he did kill people. So he was gaining a really, really dangerous reputation, that's for sure. Yeah, during the Battle of the Somme, Francis was just literally holding down the communications for the Canadians. He was pretty much just running around all around it. If you've seen pictures of Battle of the Somme, it's just like that classic, like, no man's land where you're like, I don't even know how you would walk in that, let alone be running around in that shit. Basically delivering messages all over the place. But yeah, he would dip into craters to evade machine gun fire and artillery fire. And these craters would sometimes be full of water, and sometimes really, really deep, so you could drown in these. Also, these craters had rotting corpses in them, so he was probably sitting in the same water as these rotting corpses. It was probably a really rough time for him, but he was able to overcome it, and he made it through the battle pretty much unscathed. He did actually get hit in the leg during this battle, but he was somehow able to still deliver that message, and then was eventually taken off the line due to his injuries. He was awarded his first military medal for his actions at the Battle of the Somme, which, considering everything I've said so far, is pretty surprising that this is his first medal. But also other things I've said, it's not really that surprising considering how things were in that time. But yeah, Francis, he was pretty much right back at it again. He like got shot in the leg and took like a month hiatus. He was probably like getting bored, or I have no idea. He didn't wait no time at all though. He was right into another battle, the Battle of Passchendaele. And if you've seen or just know about this battle, it's a crazy one. The Battle of the Somme was the deadliest, but this was probably like just the most depressing and like shittiest conditions you could be in during this time. Basically, it started with the town of Passchendaele, and the British and Germans absolutely decimated it. So the no man's land was the town of Passchendaele, but you literally couldn't tell that there was a town there. It was just mud, basically mud and bodies, and yeah, it was rough. Yeah, pretty much when Francis got there, all he was greeted by was mud and probably a bunch of really pissed off people, just because they were constantly wet and sleeping in the mud all the time. And all the equipment during this battle had to be brought by foot, so most of it was actually abandoned, and it kind of forced the Canadians that were there to really just bring the bare essentials. So they were really dealing with some pretty bad conditions during this battle. But regardless, they managed to overcome it, and it was a pretty filthy battle. That's for sure. Most of the engagements would probably fall down to just hand-to-hand combat. A lot of people were just like covered in mud, and you couldn't really tell who was who, and really chaotic, really chaotic stuff. You could really see that during this battle that it was starting to take a toll on Francis. He'd almost been battling for 3 years straight at this point. The abhorrent conditions of Passchendaele in particular, but Don't get me wrong, he was still the same old Francis, still up to his all his old tricks, sneaking into enemy trenches and just all of that crazy shit. But he was actually able to earn his first bar for his military medal during this battle, where he actually led the attack on a key position called Passchendaele Ridge, where he was the first man, and he was literally like trudging through like 2 feet of mud, and he led the engagement, and the Canadians were able to take the ridge, and they were able to capture POWs, you know, the whole shebang. Just another good old Francis story. But yeah, it was really starting to take a toll on him, and he'd been involved in I think 2 gas attacks at this point. He'd been shot in the leg. He'd also developed pneumonia during this battle, just because it was so wet all the time. So he was actually taken off the front lines for a little bit, because Francis definitely needed a little bit of a break, that's for sure. I think that Francis was out of the game at this point, but nope, he still had another major offensive left in him. I'm honestly not surprised. If the war went on for another 10 years, he probably just would have did the next 10 years and just kept doing his same old thing. But yeah, he would go on to fight in the Battle of the Scarpe in 1918, which was basically the Canadians were tasked with taking out the remaining Germans that were left in their perimeter of their trenches and stuff. So it was probably another crappy battle that he had to go through. They were rooting out people out of trenches. They were coming across booby traps. This is very, very far into the end of the war, so and the Germans know they're losing. The Austro-Hungarian Empire as a whole know they're losing. So they're throwing some pretty dirty tactics at this point at the Allies, that's for sure. So that being said, the Germans, they launch a massive attack at Francis and his battalion. It's pretty much a last ditch effort, and it's a pretty big one. They get Francis's company in particular down to pretty much no ammunition. They're completely surrounded. A lot of the troops in Francis's company are they're pretty much terrified. They think they're either going to be killed or captured at this point. But Francis, under an intense amount of heavy fire, because they're being absolutely onslaughted, like this is make it or break it moment here. He goes over the top and he runs through the no man's land, still taking fire, and he runs a substantial amount of ammunition back to him and his troops, and they're able to not only hold their ground, but they push the Germans back, and they're able to take key trench positions. They capture machine gun nest positions, troops. It's another Francis situation. This the whole 9 yards. He's able to do it again. Like I said, if this war kept going on, he probably would have just kept doing stuff like this. He's like, if he were like a rapper or something, he would just like constantly be putting out bangers or something like that. I don't know how to describe him. I don't know if you guys are getting the same reaction from his story, but it's just like, I don't know. It's pretty repetitive, but it's like, Jesus, this guy just won't stop. But yeah, apparently during the Battle of the Somme, Francis and his battalion, they were hit with another gas attack, and things were looking pretty grim. So his officer came up to Francis, because if anybody's going to be able to solve this situation, it's going to be Francis. So basically he was just kind of like, oh man, like, is there anything you could do? And apparently Francis performed some sort of ritual, and it actually kind of just like shifted the gas away, kind of saving all their lives. And then there's another story where they were moving through no man's land, and the ground was like really muddy and just really hazardous, and it was raining, and basically he kind of did a similar thing, and it stopped raining, and just kind of odd stories like that. But I actually have kind of another theory other than a crazy supernatural theory, which I don't think it's actually that crazy considering all the stuff he went through. But if you just look at the history of First Nations fighting in World War I, they were attributed to being some of the most elite and top-notch soldiers. And there's actually another story really similar to Francis Pegahmagabow's. His name was Johnson Padish. He was also Ojibwe First Nations from Ontario, Canada. And his story is just really similar to Francis. He's also joined up like as one of the first Canadians to go overseas, just like Francis. Fought in the Second Battle of Ypres, just like Francis. He's attributed to having 88 confirmed kills. So his story is really similar to Francis. And if you get into the history of other First Nations that were fighting for the Canadian Corps at the time, I think it was a culmination of their upbringing and their belief system that really let them be able to overcome these just insane situations. So with that being said, do you guys think there was something supernatural going on with Francis, or it was more something to do with his upbringing, or maybe even both? Leave it down in the comments below. Anyways, that being said, Francis would come back home, but it wasn't all sunshine and roses. He would suffer 4 separate injuries over the course of the war. He was shot in the leg. He inhaled numerous types of gases, both mustard and chlorine gas. He suffered with PTSD. He had basically nightmares for the rest of his life. So it was definitely a rough time for Francis when he came back home. Regardless, he would come home. He would establish himself as Shawanga First Nations. Sorry if I butchered that one. He would get involved in numerous projects and roles throughout the community. He would get married. He'd even continue his military career by acting as the local militia's major for some time. He was a huge advocate for the First Nation people's rights throughout Canada. All in all, Francis was the most decorated First Nation soldier during World War I, with 2 bars to his military medal, the British War Medal, Victory Medal, and the 1914-15 star. 378 confirmed kills and over 300 enemies captured. And Francis's family would remember him as an extremely kind and gentle man, and he would definitely paved his way as a legend in history, basically. So guys, I hope you liked that video. If you have any ideas or similar topics to this, leave it in the comments down below. And if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. With all that being said, I hope you guys have a great day, and just take it easy.
Hey guys, if you liked that video, please smash that like button, smash that subscribe button. We got a video coming out every single week, me and Tristan. So please subscribe, like, and enjoy our content, because that's why we're making it, for you guys to enjoy it. Thanks.